Mark and Emily had always enjoyed the thrill of a good storm. They were avid hikers and often sought out the solitude of remote cabins to escape the city's hustle. This time, they decided to rent a small, isolated cabin deep within the Catskill Mountains for a long weekend. The forecast predicted severe thunderstorms, but they were undeterred. They packed extra blankets, flashlights, and plenty of firewood. The first night passed uneventfully, with only the distant rumble of thunder as they sat by the fireplace sharing stories. The second night, however, was different. The storm arrived earlier than expected, and by dusk, the wind howled through the trees like a wild beast. Lightning lit up the sky, and the sound of thunder shook the very ground beneath them. Despite the storm's ferocity, they felt safe inside their sturdy cabin, until the knocking began. It was faint at first, barely audible over the storm, but unmistakable. Someone or something was knocking on the cabin door. Mark and Emily exchanged uneasy glances. The cabin was miles from the nearest road. No one could have possibly found their way there in such weather. But the knocking continued, growing louder, more insistent. Mark grabbed a flashlight and cautiously approached the door, but as soon as he reached it, the knocking stopped. He threw the door open, expecting to see a lost hiker, or perhaps an animal seeking shelter. But there was nothing. No one. Only the storm raged outside, with the wind whipping rain into his face. He closed the door and bolted it securely, but the unease lingered. Emily tried to laugh it off, suggesting it was just a tree branch blown against the cabin by the wind. They returned to the fire, but the atmosphere had changed. What was once cozy now felt suffocating, oppressive. Hours passed, and just as they began to relax, the knocking resumed. This time, it was louder, more urgent. Mark's heart raced as he moved toward the door once more, but just like before, the knocking ceased as he approached. He flung the door open, and again there was nothing but the storm. This time, however, something caught his eye. A set of footprints in the mud leading from the woods to their doorstep. The prints were deep, as if whoever made them was heavy or carrying something. They didn't lead away from the cabin, they just ended at the door. Panic set in. Emily urged him to close the door, but Mark hesitated. His eyes scanned the darkness, searching for any sign of movement, any clue as to who or what could be out there. But there was only the relentless rain and the roar of the storm. Reluctantly, he shut the door and bolted it, grabbing a kitchen knife for protection. The knocking began again, this time from the windows from every side of the cabin. The sound was maddening, coming from all directions. Mark and Emily backed into the center of the room, clutching each other, their eyes wide with terror. The storm outside seemed to grow more violent with every knock, as if the storm itself was alive, angry. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the knocking stopped. Silence. The storm raged on, but the knocking ceased entirely. For a few agonizing moments they waited, holding their breath, wondering if it was truly over. A loud crash shattered the silence. The front door had been blown open despite being bolted. Mark rushed to it, slamming it shut, but not before a blast of freezing air hit him like a punch to the gut. He fought against the wind to secure the door once more, his mind racing with fear. When he turned back, he saw Emily standing rigid in the middle of the room, her eyes fixed on something just beyond his shoulder. He turned slowly, dreading what he might see, but there was nothing there. No one. The cabin felt wrong, as if it was no longer theirs. The air was thick with tension, the kind that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. The fire, once warm and comforting, now cast grotesque shadows that danced on the walls like sinister figures. They didn't sleep that night, too afraid to close their eyes, fearing what might happen if they did. Morning came, and the storm subsided. The sun broke through the clouds, casting an eerie calm over the drenched landscape. They packed up quickly, not daring to stay another moment. As they left the cabin, they noticed something that made their blood run cold. The footprints, those deep, heavy prints, were still there, leading to the door. But now they saw a second set of footprints, smaller, leading away from the door and disappearing into the forest. They hadn't been there the night before. Mark and Emily never spoke of what happened that night again. They moved on with their lives, but the memory of that storm, of the knocking that came from nowhere, haunted them both. They never returned to the mountains, and to this day they wonder what would have happened if they had stayed one more night in that cursed cabin. Dry Creek was a small, forgotten town in Texas, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's business and secrets were hard to keep. But some secrets, the darkest ones, stayed buried. The town had its share of ghost stories, but none were as chilling as the one that unfolded during the Great Thunderstorm of 2004. Maggie was a local historian, obsessed with uncovering the town's past. She'd spent years sifting through old records and forgotten diaries, piecing together the history of Dry Creek. One story that fascinated her was the legend of the old Miller house, a crumbling mansion on the outskirts of town. The house had been abandoned for decades, ever since the tragic death of the entire Miller family during a thunderstorm in 1923. According to town law, the Millers had been a wealthy, respected family, but their lives ended in a mysterious tragedy. Some said they were struck by lightning, others whispered of a murder-suicide. The truth was never uncovered, and the house was left to rot, shunned by the townsfolk who believed it was cursed. On the night of the storm in 2004, Maggie decided to visit the Miller house. She was determined to document the mansion before it collapsed entirely. Armed with her camera and a tape recorder, she drove to the house as the first drops of rain began to fall. By the time she reached the mansion, the storm was in full swing, with lightning splitting the sky and thunder rumbling like the growl of some ancient beast. Maggie entered the house through a broken window, the front door having long since been swollen shut by years of neglect. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay. The floors creaked under her feet, and the walls were covered in peeling wallpaper and cobwebs. It was exactly what she expected, except for the feeling that she wasn't alone. As she explored the house, the storm outside grew more intense, the wind howling through the broken windows like a banshee. She set up her camera and began taking photos, documenting the dilapidated rooms and the eerie atmosphere. But as she moved from room to room, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. In the master bedroom, she found an old cracked mirror hanging on the wall. As she lifted her camera to take a picture, she saw something that made her blood run cold. In the reflection, she saw the outline of a man standing behind her. She spun around, but the room was empty. Shaking, she took a step back, and that's when she heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper, like someone breathing directly into her ear. "Get out." Maggie's heart pounded in her chest. She knew she should leave, but her curiosity got the better of her. She pressed the record button on her tape recorder and asked, "Who's here? What happened to the Millers?" For a long moment there was only silence, broken by the roar of the storm. Then faintly she heard it again, a voice barely audible over the thunder. "They took everything." The room suddenly grew cold, unnaturally so, and the lights on her camera flickered. Panic set in. She grabbed her equipment and hurried back toward the window she had entered through. But as she reached the door, she heard a loud bang from behind her. She turned, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, and saw the bedroom door slam shut on its own. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They echoed through the house, coming from every direction. "Get out! Get out!" The voice was no longer soft. It was angry, demanding. The temperature in the house continued to drop, and Maggie's breath came out in white puffs of air. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with the window latch, but it was stuck, as if the house itself was refusing to let her leave. Suddenly, the window shattered, blown inward by a gust of wind. Maggie screamed as shards of glass flew at her, cutting her face and hands. She bolted for the front door, not caring that it had been stuck for years. She threw her weight against it, and to her surprise, it flew open with a deafening crash. Maggie stumbled out into the storm, her heart racing, her mind reeling. As she ran to her car, she glanced back at the house and saw something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. In one of the upstairs windows, illuminated by a flash of lightning, she saw the silhouette of a woman holding a child, both of them staring directly at her. She sped away from the mansion, not stopping until she reached the safety of her home. She tried to listen to the recording she had made, but all she heard was static, punctuated by faint, distorted voices. The photographs she had taken were even more disturbing. In each one, she could see shadowy figures lurking in the corners of the rooms, figures that hadn't been there when she took the pictures. Maggie never returned to the Miller house. She buried her research and tried to forget what she had experienced. but the memory of that night lingered. The mansion eventually collapsed, reclaimed by nature, but the legend of the Millers lived on, whispered among the townsfolk as a warning. Never go to the old Miller house, especially during a storm, because some secrets are meant to stay buried. Route 375, known as the Extraterrestrial Highway, is famous for its proximity to Area 51 and its many UFO sightings. But there's another lesser-known legend among the locals, a story of a deadly stretch of road that appears during the most violent thunderstorms, a road that many say is cursed. In the summer of 2016, Jack, a long-haul trucker, was driving through Nevada on his way to California. The night was clear, the stars bright against the vast desert sky, and the road was empty. He was making good time listening to an old country station on the radio when the weather suddenly changed. Clouds rolled in fast, blotting out the stars, and the air grew heavy with the promise of rain. Jack had driven through plenty of storms, but something about this one felt different, almost unnatural. The first crack of thunder rattled the cab of his truck, and lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the desert in an eerie, flickering light. The rain began to fall in heavy sheets, quickly soaking the road and reducing visibility to almost nothing. He slowed down, squinting through the windshield, but the rain was relentless. The radio cut out, replaced by static, and the GPS on his dashboard went blank. Jack cursed under his breath and turned on his high beams, hoping to cut through the downpour. That's when he saw it, a narrow, unmarked road leading off the highway. It wasn't there before, he was sure of it, but now in the midst of the storm it appeared, winding off into the darkness like a snake. Jack knew the route well, and there wasn't supposed to be any turnoff for miles. But something compelled him to take it. Maybe it was the storm, or maybe it was something else, but he found himself turning onto the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel tight. The road was rough, barely more than a dirt path, and his truck jolted and bounced as he drove. The storm seemed to intensify as he ventured deeper, the lightning striking closer, the thunder booming louder. The desert landscape around him began to change. The cacti and scrub brush gave way to strange, twisted trees, their branches clawing at the sky. Jack's unease grew with each passing mile. The road didn't appear on any map, and there were no signs of civilization, no lights, no houses, nothing but the storm and the dark road ahead. The farther he went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, as if the very air was charged with something malevolent. He considered turning back, but when he glanced in the rearview mirror, the road behind him was gone, swallowed by the storm. Panic set in. He pressed down on the accelerator, trying to outrun whatever force had drawn him onto this cursed road. That's when he saw the figure in the middle of the road. It was a man standing perfectly still, illuminated by the truck's headlights. Jack slammed on the brakes, the tires skidding on the wet road, but it was too late. The truck plowed into the figure, and Jack felt the sickening thud of impact. He stopped the truck and jumped out, his heart pounding in his chest. The rain was blinding, and the storm raged around him as he searched for the man he had hit. But there was nothing, no body, no blood, not even a footprint in the mud. It was as if the man had never been there at all. Jack was about to get back in the truck when he heard a sound that froze him in place, a low, guttural growl, followed by the sound of footsteps behind him. He spun around, his flashlight cutting through the rain, but there was nothing there. The growl came again, closer this time, and Jack realized it wasn't human. Fear overtook him. He ran back to the truck, slamming the door shut and locking it. He fumbled with the keys, trying to start the engine, but the truck wouldn't turn over. The growling grew louder, more insistent, and then he saw them, shapes moving in the darkness, circling the truck. They were tall, too tall to be human, their bodies twisted and wrong with glowing eyes that pierced through the storm. Jack's breath caught in his throat as one of the creatures stepped into the light, revealing a face that was a grotesque parody of a man's, with elongated features and a mouth full of sharp, gleaming teeth. The truck's engine finally roared to life, and Jack floored the accelerator, the tires spinning on the wet road before catching traction. He drove like a madman, the creatures chasing him, their howls echoing through the storm. The road twisted and turned, leading him deeper into the desert, away from any hope of rescue. Just when he thought he couldn't go any farther, the road ended abruptly, dropping off into a steep ravine. Jack slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a halt just inches from the edge. The creatures were gone, but the storm still raged around him, as if mocking his escape. Shaking, Jack managed to turn the truck around and retrace his path. The road, once so clear, was now barely visible, as if it was fading from existence. He drove back the way he came, his eyes darting to every shadow, every movement, fearing the creatures would return. Finally, after what felt like hours, he saw the highway up ahead. He turned onto it, the storm beginning to ease as he left the cursed road behind. He didn't stop driving until he reached the next town, where he parked the truck and sat there, trying to make sense of what had happened. No one believed his story when he told them. After all, Route 375 was full of strange tales, most of them nothing more than urban legends. But Jack knew what he had seen, what had chased him that night. He never drove that stretch of road again, and he warned every trucker he met to avoid it during a storm. But the road is still out there, waiting for the next unlucky traveler to find it, waiting for the storm to bring it back to life. And those who have seen it say that once you take that road, you never truly leave it behind.